Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Husband came at dawn in the morning after work, went into the bedroom hoping to go to bed, but not so. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. I'm Brian Banks, and I'm a bit of a weird dude. I have borderline social anxiety, I'm as athletic as a potato, and I have no interest in drinking, sports, or any other male bonding activities. I'm decent looking and skinny, even though I never really work out. My main quality is that I'm smart. In fact, I'm very smart, and unlike many smart people, I'm also insightful. Despite my borderline social anxiety disorder and the fact that I skipped a grade in elementary school due to the area I lived in and the schools I attended, I did not fall behind when it came to other types of learning. There was only one woman during that period. She always went by the street name Jezebel rather than her real name, Whitney. I was not affectionate towards her, but it wasn't because I didn't try to be polite. Jezebel is my age. She is a large woman, the same height as me, and at that time, she probably weighed 5 to 10 pounds more, although she was not fat. Most of her excess weight was on her breasts and hips. Although her face was very ordinary, everyone who knew her, including me, thought that she had the most Aphrodite-like body. Any guy who wasn't into small-breasted women would find Jezebel's body to be unbeatable. I never fell in love with Jezebel, but I really liked her and would have been willing to do anything for her, even if she didn't sleep with me in return. During my senior year of college, I invented an easily programmable, encrypted, sophisticated proximity detector. It was something like the SAS system used on many toll roads in the United States, but specifically for secure systems. Various forms of my detectors have been adopted by corporations with their own systems, numerous government agencies, both state and federal, and the military. I even had to obtain access to state secrets to participate in the patenting of my own inventions. Thanks to my inventions, I made a ton of money from patent royalties and started 2 companies, one to sell products to different markets and another to research new products. Since I have no management skills and I'm only interested in invention and product engineering, I instructed my lawyers to create a network of shell companies and holding companies that would own my 2 operating companies and hire people to run them. I owned all the shares in the ultimate holding company, but it would take days for someone to figure that out. I have never used my network of companies to evade taxes, but some of them were located overseas to make it difficult for anyone trying to find out about ownership. The only people who knew I was the ultimate boss were the CEOs and CFOs of my 2 operating companies. To everyone else, I was just a salaried head of new products for one of the operating companies. By the time I was 24, I had all the mechanisms described above in place and was looking for a long-term relationship with a woman. This was difficult for me due to my borderline social anxiety disorder, but after trying many dating sites and various social groups, at 26, I finally met someone who fascinated me and who showed interest in me. Allison was probably the most beautiful woman to ever show real romantic interest in me. In addition to her beautiful face, she had a very nice body, highlighted by a pair of breasts that I considered world-class. Although our courtship was quite traditional, looking back, I now see that it was more superficial than most. I guess I was so enamored with her appearance that I overlooked some things that many would consider important in a spouse. One thing I always noticed about our relationship, however, was her complete disinterest in my work. She never asked anything about it, seemed bored, and acted completely confused if I ever brought up the topic. She was completely devoid of curiosity. Allison's lack of interest in my work was actually an advantage when it came to the prenuptial agreement. Gail, one of the lawyers who helped me set up my corporations and someone I respected greatly, insisted that I enter into a prenuptial agreement. In fact, when I was going back and forth about the prenuptial agreement after I asked Allison to marry me and she accepted, Gail threatened to quit if I didn't ask Allison to sign it. Gail drew up a prenuptial agreement that was very simple and not onerous. It simply provided that the only things excluded from community property were any stock interests or royalties associated with any company or patent that either of us owned more than 10% of on the date of marriage or acquired during the marriage. Allison asked her father to review it and then sign it without even asking me any questions. By the time I was 27 and a half, we already had our first child, a beautiful little girl we named Amber. During a short solo trip to my parents' house, I ran into Jezebel on the street. I had offered to buy my parents a new home in a more upscale community, but they were simple people with many friends in the area, so they declined. Jezebel looked great. She hadn't gained a pound since I last saw her and was better dressed than ever. We went out for coffee, and she told me about her new venture. I told her the same story I told everyone else about being an employee. Jezebel had created her website, but she was having financial problems. When I inquired further, I learned that she was only $125,000 short of making it work the way she wanted. I told Jezebel to meet me again in a week at the same cafe, at the same time, and I might be able to introduce her to an investor. She was really excited about it and gave me a big hug and a wet kiss on the cheek as I left. I thought about this for a week. $125,000 was nothing to me, and despite the nature of the business, I still had a soft spot for her. A week after our first meeting, we met again, and this time she looked even better than before. She was wearing more revealing clothes that clearly showed she still had the same perfect body. As soon as the drinks were placed in front of us, I handed her an envelope containing $125,000 in cash. Jezebel was shocked. She even started crying, something I never expected from someone with such a tough exterior. Jezebel offered to give me a stake in the site, but I politely declined, saying I just wanted it to be a gift and didn't want any ownership stake. She rubbed her hand over my thigh and offered a different kind of gratitude, but I politely declined that too, saying I loved my wife. "Your wife is a lucky woman," Jezebel said through tears as we said goodbye. "If there is anything I can do for you, just ask, and it will be done," she said, completely seriously. "Make it big," I said with a big smile and then hugged her tightly. Allison and I had 2 more children, a second girl, Whitney. No, I didn't name her after Jezebel, but I readily agreed with my wife when she suggested the name, and then a boy, Jerry. Although night with Allison was always good, over time, I realized that she was actually quite shallow and materialistic. However, she had other good qualities, and I truly loved her, the only woman I have ever loved. More importantly to me, she gave me 3 wonderful children. Amber, who was 12 years old at the most important moment in the story, had her mother's beauty and the best aspects of Allison's and my personality. She was also just as smart as me, testing at the same genius level as me, but much more outgoing. 10-year-old Whitney was also a beautiful girl, although unfortunately for her, she had inherited some of my features, which, while not unattractive, were not in the same class as Allison's or Amber's. However, Whitney was the most caring, loving, and empathetic person I have ever known and could light up any room with just her presence. She also didn't hide when her brains went black. 8-year-old Jerry was just a cheerful little boy. I don't know where he got it, probably from Allison's side of the family, but he was a true athlete. I developed an interest in baseball and basketball just so I could talk intelligently with him about his favorite activities. He never had a bad word to say about anyone, always seemed to be in a good mood, and got along well with both his sisters, and they with each other. With such wonderful children, you'd think I'd consider Allison a great mother. Unfortunately, this was not the case. The main conflicts between Allison and me arose over raising our children. I'm not sure what it was, maybe just a green snake of jealousy, but Allison had a bad relationship with Amber. She was too strict with Amber and sometimes cruel in her remarks. I had several outbursts with Allison right in front of Amber when Allison treated her badly because I just couldn't stand it. By the time Amber was 12 years old, it had gotten to the point where Amber wouldn't go anywhere with her mother unless I went too. This became a real problem one summer when Allison wanted to take the kids to her family's lake house for a week while I had to work. I had to do my best to convince Amber to go, and I had to seriously argue with Allison to promise to be nice to Amber on the trip. Although Allison treated Whitney and Jerry better than Amber, she had her moments with them as well. Plus, even though Allison was a stay-at-home mom, I probably spent as much time with the kids as she did since she was always going out, and the time I spent with them was usually much higher quality. So, having been married for about 15 years with 3 wonderful children, a wife whom I loved dearly and enjoyed intimate with, even though we did not have a perfect marriage, I was driving home from the airport after a one-day business trip. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Even though I had told Allison about my full itinerary during a phone call with the family the previous evening, she, as usual, hadn't paid any attention to it. So I wasn't sure if she would be home to greet me or not. I was standing at a stop sign, about to turn right onto the road where I live, when a car I recognized drove by. It was Roger Mayberry's distinctive red Corvette. The top was down, and he was clearly visible in the driver's seat, fiddling with the radio while tunes played through his custom speakers. Roger Mayberry was one of the best salespeople in one of my companies, which dealt primarily with military sales. He understood our technology as well as could be expected of any non-engineer and communicated easily with people. Like virtually all our employees, he had a top-level security clearance, even higher than most, because the military applications of our technology were more classified than others. What is Roger doing here at this time of day? I asked myself naively. Since the street I live on is a through street, I didn't even consider that he could have been at my house just 2 blocks away. I simply wondered what kind of business might have brought him to this end of town. About a minute later, I pulled into the driveway, entered the house, and, not seeing Allison on the first floor, walked up the pretentious spiral staircase that Allison loved and insisted on having, to the second floor. As I approached the open door of the master bedroom, my shoes made a distinctive pop-pop sound on the marble floor of the hallway. When I was about 10 feet from the door, I heard a sultry voice. "Are you forgetting something, Roger, or have you decided to go for another round?" In shock, I walked into the master bedroom and saw Allison lying without clothes on her back. When she looked up and saw me, her smile quickly turned to despair, and she half shouted, "Oh, Brian. Damn, I'm so sorry." Unfortunately, within an instant, my mind fully grasped the situation, and feelings of anger, disgust, anxiety, hatred, and fear raced through my brain at incredible speed. I'm sure I stood there frozen with my mouth open while all these emotions merged into one overwhelming sensation, a dark, oppressive blanket of sadness. I remember taking a few steps back, but I don't recall anything else until I woke up in the hospital. It seemed the monitor had gone off and alerted the medical staff that I had woken up because a nurse came running into my room a few seconds after I opened my eyes, followed a minute later by a doctor. "How are you feeling, Mr. Banks?" a middle-aged nurse with a name tag that read Nancy asked sweetly. "It feels like my head is in a vice. I make a sound." "We're so glad to see you came to your senses so quickly," she exclaimed, grabbing my hand while looking at the monitor next to my bed. "Why am I in the hospital, and how did I get here?" I asked as the doctor entered the room. "Mr. Banks, I'm Dr. Patel," answered the short and very pleasant Indian doctor. "Let me examine your eyes, and then I'll answer your questions," she continued while Nurse Nancy held my hand. Dr. Patel took a light source from her pocket and, without directing the intense beam directly into my eyes, moved the light back and forth, manipulating my eyelids and the skin around my eyes with her soft but firm hands. 2 minutes later, when Dr. Patel straightened up, Nurse Nancy released my hand. They both smiled, and Dr. Patel said, "Mr. Banks, you suffered a concussion. According to your wife, you tripped over something in your bedroom and fell backward onto the marble floor in your hallway, hitting your head on a rock. You could have died, but your vital signs are good, and your concussion is probably not as severe as we initially feared." Instantly, the blanket of sadness fell over me again as I remembered what had caused me to fall backward. "By the way, where's my faithful wife?" "Ah, well, she was here, but she left to pick up your kids from school," Nancy replied. Starting to regain my senses, I looked at my watch. It was 3:08, so she probably picked them up at that moment. "Have you eaten anything lately?" Dr. Patel asked, her face still concerned. "Not since 8 o'clock in the morning," I answered. "I strongly recommend that you eat something, especially before your wife returns with the kids," she said. "Nurse Jenkins, could you please ask the kitchen to bring some oatmeal here quickly?" "Cinnamon raisin, no brown sugar," I added, turning to Nancy and trying to be as pleasant as possible. The oatmeal was delivered within 5 minutes. I quickly ate it and felt a little better by the time Nancy returned to my room and said, "You have visitors." My 3 jewels ran in, each of them trying to be the first to reach me. "Kids, don't touch Daddy's head or neck," I laughed, trying to hug all 3 of them at once. They all spoke at once, each more animated than the other. Despite my physical condition and emotional state, I had to grin. A real laugh would probably be painful, but a good one was definitely in order. I barely noticed Allison, as I was busy talking with the kids. It was clear that Amber had been crying, but now, seeing that I was not on the verge of death, she visibly perked up, and the other 2 were smiling. Allison stood at the door with a thoughtful expression on her face. While I chatted with the kids, I avoided discussing my trauma as much as possible and instead directed the conversation toward their activities from yesterday and today. Allison interjected with questions or comments several times, but I simply ignored her and never made eye contact. After about 15 minutes of fun, I noticed Nancy say something to Allison. A minute later, Allison announced, "Kids, Daddy needs to get better, and he needs some rest, so we need to go. Kiss his hands goodbye, and we'll visit him again tomorrow." The children caressed my hands and waved goodbye as they left. Amber was clearly in better spirits than when she arrived, and Jerry seemed fine. But now, having gotten a good look at me in the hospital bed from afar, Whitney began to tear up and turn her head sharply, trying to hide her tears. After the kids left, Allison called out to them, "Meet Mom at the elevator. I'm going to talk to Dad for a few minutes." Allison turned and walked toward me. I didn't have time to fully plan my response, and I obviously didn't have the ability in the moment to implement the scenarios I had already thought through, so I just closed my eyes and listened. "Brian, I'm so sorry that you had to see me like that. I never wanted you to find out. I'm sorry that I'm not the wife that you deserve. I really hope that when you get better, we can discuss this," she said, her voice filled with sobs, though there were no obvious tears. When she didn't get any response from me, she added, "Maybe tomorrow you'll want to talk. If you want, just call me." Her last statement was telling in itself. Obviously, she had no interest in coming to see me at the hospital. I would have to call her myself for a conversation, otherwise, she wouldn't have shown up. Dr. Petra returned about 20 minutes after Allison left. After another examination, she said, "You don't look too devastated after talking with your wife." "I haven't talked to my wife," I replied emotionlessly. "However, although I still feel deep sadness over the loss of my old life, I am absolutely confident that I can turn my emotions into action." "That's good," she said with a smile. "Doctor, how long do you think I need to stay here?" "I insist that you stay one more night after this one, but after that, if your examination is good, you will be free to leave. But you need to limit your activities for at least a week, and definitely not go to the office for at least 3 or 4 days." "I insist," she answered, her voice as firm as it could be for a 5-foot-tall woman. "I promise," I laughed, then reached over and took her hand. "That is, I promise on the condition that you do not tell my wife that you'll let me go on Friday morning. Obviously, I cannot ask you to lie, but if she even bothers to ask, can you hint that I will have to stay until Saturday?" "I think I can do that," Dr. Petra laughed. "As long as I don't have to outright lie in response to a direct question. I'll tell Nurse Jenkins the same thing." I had a full dinner, called my parents, whom, for obvious reasons, Allison had not informed, and asked for a notepad and pen. I felt too overwhelmed that night to write anything, but the next morning, I was definitely ready to start planning my next steps. Allison showed up again with the kids around 3:50 p.m. on Thursday. As I suspected, she hadn't bothered to come see me earlier that day, and I certainly wasn't going to call her, although Nancy said she had called the nurse's office once to check on my well-being. By the time the kids arrived on Thursday, I was feeling much better. This was not only because I was recovering, but also because I had a very productive day. Several people from my office came to see me, as well as my lawyer, Gail, who handled my prenuptial agreement, and my parents had lunch with me. Nothing I did related to my research on proximity sensors. It was all about planning the rest of my life outside of work. After a wonderful half-hour with the kids, as I had asked Nancy earlier that day, she came in and said I needed to rest. Allison did the same thing she had done the first day, but this time I didn't close my eyes when she talked to me. "Darling, you didn't call me today to come and talk about our situation," she said in a quiet voice. "I guess I wasn't important enough to you for you to check to see if I was alive or dead if I hadn't called, huh?" I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my comment, but probably not very successfully. "It's not fair, dear," she replied softly. "I didn't want to bother you if you didn't want to talk." "I'll probably want to talk over the weekend, honey," I said in a mocking tone. "After I'm discharged." "Brian, I'm so sorry again. I really hope we can get over this," she mumbled. Then she took my hand and kissed it. I didn't show any reaction. "Bye," she said modestly, waving her hand as she left. Of course, it wasn't lost on me that she never said she loved me or that she was going to end her affair with Roger Mayberry. The only sign of real regret I could sense was that she got caught. The remaining 10% of my plan that I haven't yet finalized will now be easy to complete. Just before visiting hours ended, Allison's parents arrived. I was a little surprised until they suddenly revealed the reason for their visit. Allison seemed to think it would look bad if she threatened me with losing my children in the event of a divorce, so she asked her parents to do it. Allison told us about her big mistake, her mother said, holding my hand. "Oh really? Which one?" I asked sarcastically. After a long pause, her mother replied, "You know very well. This is what led to your accident. I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her. Brian, you are such a good man and a loving father, and I know that it would be very difficult for you not to be with your children every day." "You're absolutely right, Ruth," I said in a grim voice. Being gloomy was just a game. The most important thing in my plan was to obtain the exclusive right to raise the children. After a few minutes of casual conversation, after Allison's parents delivered the message that I'm sure their daughter demanded they deliver, they left. Any doubts about what I should do disappeared. On Friday morning, Dr. Petra did another exam and then signed my discharge papers. "Remember, rest for at least a week," she said. "Honest, pioneer," I replied, making my version of the pioneer salute. Having never been a pioneer, I don't know how accurately I did it, but at least she laughed. I thanked Nancy and offered her a $1,500 tip, which she was obliged to refuse. So instead, I hugged her carefully and left with my assistant Jack by 10 a.m. It would be very easy to get revenge on Roger Mayberry. I could just fire him, but this would not be enough for revenge. I needed to destroy his career. If he simply got another job in a related field with almost the same salary, what kind of punishment would that have been? I needed to make sure he lost his security clearance. This would make it impossible for him to obtain a job with anything close to his current compensation or prestige. After consulting with Gail and the divorce specialist she recommended, and after obtaining information about Roger's bank accounts from HR, since his salary was being deposited directly, the next step was to meet with Jezebel. She would help me ensure that I would have exclusive rights to raise my children. My assistant drove me to Jezebel's office, but I asked him to wait in the car. Although Jack would be fully aware of all my plans, I needed to talk to Jezebel alone. I called ahead, but Jezebel still seemed surprised and excited to see me. "Wow, Jezebel," I laughed as she quickly moved her big, beautiful body towards me. "I have a concussion, and I can't hug you like I would like to." She looked good. She was dressed stylishly but professionally and looked like she hadn't gained a pound, although her breasts seemed even larger than I remembered. They probably just seemed bigger because I hadn't seen her in 10 years and didn't remember how big they were. There was some gray in her hair, but it actually softened her features. Yes, she was still an absolutely cute woman. "Come into my office," she demanded, grabbing my arm. After I expressed my joy at seeing Jezebel again, I got straight to the point. "I need your help, Jezebel," I said, feeling my sadness again. "Whatever, Brian," she said, holding my hand. "You have no idea how much I want to help you, no matter what it is. You helped me achieve my dream, so I'm all in." That comment, and her big smile when she said it, did more to lift my sadness than I could have imagined. "Okay, you asked for it," I laughed. I held back no detail about what had happened or about the aspect of my reaction for which I needed her help. This included telling her how important my children were to me, and I even showed her pictures of them. When she heard that my middle daughter was called Whitney, she stopped in her tracks. "Did you call her Whitney?" she exclaimed. I knew what she was thinking, and there was no reason, given the current circumstances, not to embellish the truth. "Yes, in honor of my favorite person from my pre-marriage days," I replied with a big smile. She choked, began to cry, and between sobs, "You were incredible. The only 2 times I cried in the last 10 years were because of you." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "Hey, tears of joy are great. I could use some right now." "How can I help deliver them?" she asked, wiping her tears. "I need a video of my wife to appear on your website, and the money for it to be transferred to her bank account." Once she had recovered from the initial shock, we discussed the situation fully. She had many good suggestions and one great one. You need to be sure that it will never be traced back to you, and someone might find out that we had a pre-existing relationship, she said. Is this what you call a relationship? I laughed. Shut up, she giggled. Now it's my turn to teach you. I have a friend who can do it on a paid site even more popular than mine, no questions asked. Let me call him right now. In 4 minutes on the phone with her friend, Jezebel had arranged everything. She told me what format the videos should be in and that any money I gave her would be passed on to her friend. The same amount would also be transferred to Allison's account. Also, my friend will need your wife's signature on the contract, including the release. Can you arrange this? I can, I answered. I'll send it to you today, she said. Wait until tomorrow. I'll create a new email account at the library specifically for this purpose and write to you from it as soon as she signs. I smiled, feeling elated as I prepared to leave Jezebel's office. I took a chance and kissed her on the lips when I said goodbye. Luckily, shortly after we got married, my wife insisted on having a credit card in her name only and a bank account in her name only. I've never checked them before, but I will now. I won't have any problems getting the numbers from the documents she left lying around in her home office. I had many advantages to carry out my revenge, both Roger's and Allison's bank account numbers, Allison's credit card number, enough of my own money to fund anything I wanted, and Jezebel's help. Also, my assistant Jack was absolutely dedicated, and I could rely on him to complete any task. I need to say something about Jack. He is my assistant, not my secretary. He is the highest paid employee, other than the COOs and CFOs of my companies. While he has an engineering degree and is great at analyzing data and making technical improvements to my crazy ideas, he is also willing to do anything to help. That's why he picked me up from the hospital and was waiting for me outside Jezebel's office. Another thing is that he was a Division I football player in college and played center field in his senior year. He stands 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighs 245 pounds of almost pure muscle. It is difficult for him to find jackets whose sleeves he wouldn't tear. Even if something goes wrong in my plans for revenge, I have thought everything through carefully and must stay optimistic. After Jack drove me to my car at the house, I didn't go inside to check if Allison was home. I ate lunch and then called Allison's cell phone. Hi, honey. So glad you called. Do you want me to come see you? Was Allison's happy greeting as my cell number apparently showed up on her phone. That won't be necessary, I replied, showing no warmth in my voice. I got discharged early, and I'll pick up the kids. Then we'll go get ice cream. We'll be home around 5:30. Oh, honey, I have to make you a nice dinner at home, she tried to sound enthusiastic. Just don't spoil their appetite, I interrupted her. Thanks for the parenting tips, I replied sarcastically. See you at 5:30. The children were happy to see me, asked about my health, and were delighted with their activities. They were even more excited when I told them that we were going to get ice cream from a local place, which had always been their favorite treat. As all 4 of us were thoroughly enjoying our Sundays, I opened up to them. Children, I want you to know that some things will change in the future, and that none of these changes will be your fault, I began in a low, matter-of-fact tone. This didn't fool Amber for a second. Without hesitation, she anticipated what I was going to say. She thought it through to the end. If you and Mom get divorced, I will live with you, she blurted out. Are you going to get a divorce? Whitney asked. Let's not rush things, I said, trying to console them, especially Whitney, who suddenly looked devastated. Mom and I are going through some hardships, and I don't know where this will lead. But the one thing I want you to know is that we both love you with all our hearts, and that you 3 beautiful creatures are in no way the cause of our problems. Amber shocked me again. You love us with all your heart, but does Mom have it? Mom loves us, Jerry interjected. Don't be so sure, baby, Amber replied sharply, trying to be as diplomatic as possible. I placed my hand on Amber's arm. Honey, I know Mommy loves you all unconditionally. Sometimes she just doesn't know how to show it. Let's not think badly about her, okay? And let's hope things work out. Whitney was sobbing quietly, but Jerry and Amber seemed to come out of their despondency, especially when Jerry, with an 8-year-old serious expression, asked, Dad, will you come to my little league game tomorrow at noon? It's against the Ravens, and I'll be the pitcher. I wouldn't miss it for the world, son, I chuckled. What events do you girls have on Saturday? I asked in the most cheerful tone I could manage. AG, I lost 3 days due to my hospital stay and didn't get my usual Thursday report. By the time we got home around 5:20 p.m., all 3 kids seemed settled. I made sure that at least one child was between Allison and me while greeting her since I didn't want any physical contact with her. In the evening, after the children went to bed, I went to the guest room. Don't you want to talk? Allison asked. My head is pounding from the concussion, and I just need to take some painkillers and get some sleep. It will probably be intermittent, and I don't want to bother you, I replied, swallowing 2 pills and then closing the door. I'm ready to talk anytime, Allison said as the guest room door closed behind her. I was able to avoid any real discussion or intimacy with Allison on both Saturday and Sunday without much difficulty and was able to proceed with my plan. The first steps were easy. Using Allison's credit card, I ordered 2 small high-tech video cameras and motion detectors on Saturday morning for express delivery to my home on Monday. At the library, I printed out the contract that Jezebel had emailed to me on the account I had created for that purpose, and immediately deleted it. I also printed out the new beneficiary and health insurance forms from my company's database, attached the contract as the second-to-last item in the stack, and placed tabs for Allison to sign them all. I knew Allison would be in a good mood this weekend, but it wouldn't last too long. On Sunday, I presented her with the paperwork and told her that these were health, disability, and life insurance forms for work that just needed to be updated and that she and the kids were co-beneficiaries of all my insurance. I left the documents with her, telling her to read them at her leisure. I knew she wouldn't read them all but would skim the first 1 or 2. When she saw her name in the first 2 beneficiaries, she smiled, apparently believing that despite my distance, I had no plans to divorce her. With a big smile, she brought me the documents just a few minutes after I gave them to her. It's all signed, honey, she chimed, handing them to me as I started a card game with Whitney and Jerry. Thank you, I said and simply tossed the documents into my open briefcase as casually as I could and dealt out the cards. I also called the CEO of the company I owned, where Roger Mayberry worked, and instructed him to have the federal agency in charge of our security audit schedule a security audit of 5 people in Mayberry's division. Due to the sensitive nature of our work, we are subject to random security checks, so no employee would know that the check was initiated by their employer and not the government. Monday morning, after the kids left for school, Allison insisted on talking. Brian, we can't ignore what happened. If we ignore it, it will eat you up inside and ruin our relationship, she began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I wanted to say what relationship, but refrained. Instead, I said, Allison, my head is still spinning, and I have yet to come to terms with what I saw. I need to get myself in order before we can have a full conversation. I'm not going to do anything hasty. Okay, dear, she answered after a short pause, obviously pleased, if not happy. I hope you get better soon. I really want to show you how much I love you. I smiled, which almost killed me. I have to go to the country club in half an hour for a meeting of the social committee. I'll be back around 2 to pick up the children from school. Will you be okay without me? She asked. In response to her question, I wanted to say we'll find out soon, but again I restrained myself. Have a nice time. I'll be fine, I replied. She made it too easy. About half an hour after she left, the cameras were delivered by courier. I called Jack, and together we installed cameras, switches, and motion sensors in the bedroom in less than an hour. We handled all equipment using latex gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints or DNA. Then we needed to send signals to Allison's computer. I'm great with computers, but Jack is a real wizard. We just need to find her password, and it will only take me 10 minutes to connect the cameras to her computer. I have the most effective password cracking software on my laptop. I'll link it to her computer and get to work, Jack announced, still wearing his latex gloves. As soon as Jack started the program, he began to say, "What can we do while it works?" but was interrupted by a beep. "What is this?" I asked. "It doesn't work?" "I don't think so." "My God, it's already broken," he laughed. "How is this possible?" I asked. The program first checks the 1,000 most common passwords before starting to use cracking algorithms. Haha, her password is Princess, the 28th most common password according to the software. That's typical, I laughed. She never listened to what I said about technology. Why would she listen to me when I told her to make a password out of random characters? Jack's words turned out to be true, and 10 minutes later, he was recording from the cameras into a file with an inconspicuous name on Allison's computer. After another 5 minutes, he had it set up so I could access the file from my office anytime I wanted and could turn the cameras and motion sensors on and off remotely. I went to work on Tuesday because I was feeling fine and turned on the cameras and motion sensors when I left. I arranged for a transfer of $110,000 to Roger Mayberry's bank account from my company registered in the Cayman Islands. Afterwards, I felt good emotionally and was making good physical progress in recovering from the concussion, so I was really working. After the kids went to bed Tuesday night, Allison approached me. "Why don't you come back to our bed tonight? Your head should feel better if you were able to work today." "Yes," I answered. "I almost feel normal." On Wednesday and Thursday, I almost allowed myself to fantasize about Allison realizing how much she had hurt me, really loving me, and even breaking things off with Mayberry. But that didn't stop me from turning on the cameras when I was out or continuing with my plan because I knew those thoughts were just a fantasy and not reality. This was confirmed when I watched the video from Thursday afternoon. In the video, my faithful wife showed the essence of her fidelity. While I was somewhat relieved to know that the video was what I needed to try to gain sole custody of the children, my sadness made a brief and very unwelcome comeback. On Friday morning, I uploaded Allison's Thursday afternoon video to the Pay site, delivered Jezebel $15,000 in cash, and by Friday evening, $15,000 was transferred from the site to Allison's bank account, and the video was posted to all paying customers. Over the next 2 weeks, 2 more videos were uploaded to the site, 2 more $5,000 deposits were made into Allison's account, and another $10,000 was transferred from another company in the Cayman Islands to Mayberry's bank account. I now needed to put the main part of the plan into action before Allison and Mayberry received their bank statements at the end of the month and wondered what the hell was going on. The day after the 3rd video became available to paid subscribers, Mayberry underwent a security check. I don't know how this happened, but the inspector had a copy of one of the videos as well as a statement from his bank account. Mayberry was the 3rd person in his group to be interviewed that day, so I'm sure he didn't know that his interview was the only one that was important. After Mayberry was hooked up to a lie detector and preliminary questions were asked, the examiner pressed him, "Mr. Mayberry, do you have any extracurricular activities that someone could use to blackmail you?" "No, I don't think so," Mayberry replied, causing the lie detector needle to move sharply. "I'd like to show you a video, Mr. Mayberry," the inspector continued, pressing a few buttons on his iPad. "Who is this woman you had an intim with 2 weeks ago on Thursday?" Mayberry seemed to turn pale as he debated whether to try to lie or tell the truth, which would be worse for his security clearance. It looked like he decided to confess. "Allison Banks. Isn't she married to one of your colleagues? Brian Banks?" Well, Brian Banks actually works for a related company, although his office is in the same building as mine." "It's a big building," Mayberry stammered. "Have you ever thought that an affair with a married colleague could potentially lead to blackmail?" I never thought about that," Roger mumbled. "Have you received any payments from foreign entities since your last security clearance?" "Absolutely not," Roger replied indignantly. "Let me show you your bank statement for this month, Mr. Mayberry. What are the deposits from 2 different companies from the Cayman Islands for?" There was a long pause. With trepidation in his voice, Mayberry replied, "I don't know. I've never seen this. There must be some mistake. An error from 2 different companies from the Cayman Islands, whose owners we could not identify," the inspector continued. "Yes, someone is setting me up," Mayberry whined, clearly completely upset. After a few more questions, the interview was concluded. Mayberry said nothing when, after disconnecting the electrodes from the lie detector, the examiner said, "Mr. Mayberry, until you are told otherwise, you are prohibited from having any contact with persons associated with confidential and classified information. You are also prohibited from contacting Mr. or Mrs. Banks or either of the 2 corporations that deposited the money into your account. If you do this, you will be held accountable." I felt really good the evening after the Mayberry interview, really good. Allison sensed my joy and flirted with me. After dinner, we went to bed as soon as we were sure the kids were asleep. The next day, I sent the children to school. All I received from Allison were icy stares. As soon as the kids left, I made a phone call, and 30 seconds later, the doorbell rang. "This is for you," I laughed. "How dare you talk to me like that?" Allison exploded. "I won't do this anymore," I answered, already laughing openly. When Allison answered the door, the bailiff handed her the divorce papers. All I heard was, "Mrs. Allison Banks, yes, you are served." Attached to the divorce papers were photographs of her having a night with Mayberry, as well as the name of a website with a password that could be used to access it. "You didn't think that I would find out about your earnings, did you?" I asked as she stood at the kitchen table in a daze. "Haven't you even looked at what you look like on the website?" "Here's your chance to find out," I shouted as she held up a piece of paper with the site's web address and password. I couldn't believe it when my assistant brought it to my attention. "Isn't it enough that you disrespect me by having an intimate with that man in our bed?" What?" she replied, tears gathering in her eyes. "I'll take the kids for the weekend," I announced, standing up. "Make sure you hire the best lawyer you can afford because you'll definitely need one." That same day, Mayberry was fired and removed from the building, and his security clearance was revoked. About an hour before I was supposed to pick up the kids for the weekend, my secretary called on the intercom, "Brian, there's a report that Roger Mayberry is drunk in the parking lot and screaming your name. Should I call the police?" "No, Sherry," I laughed, "call Jack. Let him come here as soon as possible. This is too good to be true." When Jack arrived, we walked up to the window of our building where we could see Mayberry. We quickly developed a plan. Jack exited through one of the side doors and stayed close to the building, out of camera view, while I boldly exited through the main entrance. As soon as Mayberry saw me, he screamed, "It was you, Banks. You got me fired and ruined my security clearance." "I know it. I'm going to blow you to smithereens." I approached the spot within the camera's field of view where Jack was. I let Mayberry get close enough to hit me, and even though it was only a tap on the shoulder, I acted as if it had been the hardest blow in history. As Mayberry bent down to strike again, Jack came into the camera's view, grabbed Mayberry, and elbowed him in the jaw as if he were a forward from the opposing team. Mayberry was thrown back several meters, losing consciousness. Jack came over to help me up, and I pretended to be a little dazed, leaning on the car. Jack called 911. All this action took place in full view of security cameras, and the police arrived within 3 minutes. Mayberry was handcuffed and confined to a stretcher, which was then taken by ambulance to the hospital, with one of the police officers riding along. I filled out the necessary paperwork to file an assault charge, then picked up the kids and headed to a beautiful mountain resort for the weekend. I told the kids at the end of the weekend that Allison and I were getting a divorce. Amber seemed pleased, and the other two took it surprisingly calmly, taking to heart my promise that we would both love them the best we could. When we returned Sunday night, Allison wasn't as angry as I expected. In anticipation of a possible hysterical attack from her, I had moved all my valuables and most of my clothes into temperature-controlled storage. I had no intention of leaving home, however. Once the kids told her what we did during our fun weekend, Allison and I talked. "I know you did this whole video thing, Brian, although I don't know how you did it," were her first words, albeit in a more conciliatory tone than I expected. "No apologies. No, it was a mistake. No, forgive me," I asked. "You're just accusing me of something I obviously didn't do," I replied, trying to sound outraged in case she was recording our conversation. "I was busy over the weekend, Brian. I hired a lawyer and a computer expert. Again, I don't know how you did it, but you've covered your tracks really well, and I'm going to have a hard time refuting this accusation of unfitness as a mother. However, I hope that we can come to some kind of agreement regarding custody." "Of course we can, Allison. You'll give me full custody in the house so the kids don't have to move, and I'll give you generous visitation rights. I'll also buy you a house so you and Mayberry can do your thing there. Did you hear that he not only lost his job but also his career? I don't want to share a house with Roger. That was never my goal." "It was." She began to speak. I quickly interrupted her. I don't want to hear it, Allison, I said sharply. I pulled myself together and continued, you can live with anyone. I just don't care. I'm just making a suggestion. After a pause, and actually a couple of tears, she continued, look, I know you think I'm a bad mother, but I'm not. I love the children with all my heart and cannot imagine how I can live without them. I also don't see how it would benefit either of us to take this to court. I know you will slander me in every possible way, and I don't have the strength for that. Neither of us needs the kids to know all the details or see the video. I agree that we don't want the children to know the details, I said thoughtfully. What do you suggest? I asked, genuinely interested. My lawyer suggests that we agree on a mediator. He says a former family law judge would be the best choice. I will agree to full or joint custody, and you can do the same. We will allow the mediator to review everything, including the children's wishes, and will abide by his decision. This way, we maintain confidentiality and can reach a solution much faster, she replied. I was actually shocked that she could be so intelligent. I think she realized that I had a much stronger character than she had previously thought, as I am sure she had several long conversations with Roger Mayberry. Let's set up a joint meeting with our lawyers early next week and work out the details, I said. I have only one objection to your proposal. Under no circumstances will I agree to joint custody. It's too difficult for the kids, and I want full custody. If the mediator decides otherwise, I will agree, but only in that case. I let Allison stay in the master bedroom while I slept in the guest room. I didn't tell her why because I didn't want to add to the stress level, but now that it was all clear, there was no way I was going to sleep where she was having fun with Mayberry. On Tuesday, we held a joint meeting with our lawyers. We both instructed our lawyers to proceed according to our requests legally. We didn't want them to argue the contract. The contract we drew up included dividing all family assets equally, except for what was exempt under the prenuptial agreement, which covered 90% of our wealth. Naming the mediator, a former family judge in good standing. Scheduling a hearing before the mediator and determining when the mediator would make a secret decision. The amount of child support I will pay Allison if she is awarded either full or shared custody of any child. The amount of support I will pay Allison for 2 years or until she remarries, whichever comes first. Restrictions on her communicating with Mayberry in any way if the children were present. She was offended by this but agreed since she was no longer interested in him. An agreement not to speak to the children in an attempt to influence what they say to the mediator. How much Allison can pay, at my expense, for a new place to live, whether a house, condo, or apartment, if I get full custody and she has to move out of our home. Specific terms for joint custody or visiting rights if one of us gets full custody of any child. We worked out all the details throughout the day, and it was done. The potential mediator was contacted the next day. He agreed to take the case, and we settled on the terms of his payment, which was to be divided in half from our joint assets not subject to the prenuptial agreement. We even set a preliminary hearing date in 2 weeks and a hearing date in 4 weeks. I did not force Allison to include this in the contract, but I spoke to her privately about it. We both agreed that neither of us would bring anyone else into our home while we occupied it together, and that after deciding who needs to leave, this person would do so within 2 weeks. Allison and I were quite polite to each other while we waited for the hearing. I never tried to influence the children, and as far as I know, neither did she. We never made mean or even sarcastic remarks to each other, even when we were alone. On the day of the hearing, I was nervous, although I was confident I had the advantage. The worst outcome could be joint custody, and since I wanted full custody so badly, I was almost in a panic. The hearing went fairly well, although just before it was time for the judge to talk to the kids, he made some comments that made my stomach churn. He seemed to be leaning towards joint custody. Before interviewing the children, he asked us a question. I see that you have agreed to watch my interviews with children on cable television. The mediator said, sorry, I can't agree to this. I didn't realize until just now, but it will destroy the necessary openness and trust one need with my children. If you do not agree to meet with each child privately, I will have to refund your money and recommend another mediator. Since the interviews with the children were supposed to take place the next day, on a day when they didn't go to school, I was almost tempted to say I disagreed and hoped we could find another mediator less inclined towards joint custody. My lawyer talked me out of it, especially because she knew of Amber's antipathy towards Allison and that, from past experiences, the mediator, when he was a judge, had believed the children's wishes. Amber was only a year away from being able to make her own decision under state law, and the judge would probably give her word more credit than any other mediator. Before Allison and I went home, we met with our lawyers and agreed to the terms of the mediation. We also agreed not to question the children afterwards about what they said. That night at dinner, Allison made several comments that I thought the children would interpret as an expression of her desire for shared custody. I just looked at her intently and didn't say anything in response. Amber caught my eye and smiled slightly. The next day, the mediator personally met with each of the children. Jerry's interview took only about 20 minutes, Whitney's took about half an hour, and Amber's took over an hour. When Amber came out and was sure Allison and her lawyer weren't looking, she gave me a thumbs up, as per our agreement. Allison's parents took the children out to lunch after the interviews and brought them back to our house around 4 p.m. After the lunch break, the mediator was ready to make a decision. We didn't expect this. He still had a week under his contract to make a decision, so there was no obligation to make it then. He didn't even want to hear the 30 minutes of closing arguments that the lawyers had prepared. After considering all the evidence and determining that the best interests of the children were paramount, he said, "I am awarding sole custody of all 3 children to the father, Brian Banks. I also consider that, under the circumstances, the contract entered into by the parties before the case was brought before me was reasonable and in the best interests of the children. Therefore, the case will be settled on those terms. On Monday, I will provide you with a certified copy of this summary judgment for distribution to the family court with your decision. Thank you for entrusting me with this matter, and I wish you good luck in the future." Allison and I both started crying for different reasons. The ride home was silent. I was not in the mood for celebration, and she was depressed. My old feelings of sadness came over me again at the finality of our family's breakup, even though it was on the best possible terms for me, given that the breakup was necessary. The night we told the kids, Allison was distant, so I had to take over most of the conversation. Jerry and Whitney were sad and gave Allison a heartfelt hug, while Amber gave her the obligatory hug. I said only good things about Allison and explained how the visits would be arranged. I purchased another house for Allison less than a week after the hearing, and she moved there within the agreed-upon time frame. The kids and I helped her, as did her parents and brother. We also hired a moving company to handle the large items she took from our home, including the king-size bed from the master bedroom. When the divorce was finalized a few months later, I held a victory party at the house to thank all the people who had helped me, including my closest friends and parents. I didn't tell the kids what the party was for, I just said it was a general celebration. Amber, now 13 years old, understood everything. A few minutes before the guests arrived, while I was making final preparations in the office, she came in and closed the door. She made me sit down, and she sat on my lap. "Dad, how happy are you that the custody agreement went the way it did?" she asked. It was a difficult question even for her. "I'm very happy, Amber." "Why do you ask?" I replied. She smiled widely. "I knew it would work. When I talked to the mediator, I told him that I saw Mom and that guy from Mayberry having a night in our house when I came home sick one day, and that it had a terrible effect on me. Have you seen them?" My response was startled. "Who cares? She cheated. I would refuse to go with her if she got custody of me, and I knew it was better for Jerry and Whitney to stay with us. I just thought you'd like to know," she concluded with a big smile. She kissed me on the cheek, jumped off my lap, and disappeared. I decided never to deal with this issue again. However, since the victory celebration, I have been pursuing Jezebel. Jezebel came to the party looking like $1 million. She immediately became close to Jerry and Whitney. She played ball and pepper with Jerry for a good half hour and handled it much better than I ever did. Jezebel sat down with Whitney one-on-one. I don't know what they talked about, but they chatted and laughed for an hour. Amber was more reserved towards Jezebel than the other 2 children, but she also seemed to have a positive attitude towards her, and they talked about fashion. Jezebel spent that night with me. As I walked away, I said, "Jezebel, I don't know what you see in me, but damn, I really enjoy being with you. Do we have a chance for a real relationship?" Looking into my eyes, she licked her lips. I see in you a kind, generous, smart person. Why don't you take me to a resort on the weekend of the 14th for 3 days, and we'll see if we both want a real relationship. Honestly, I'm tired of searching. I need a man who will be mine and only mine. She kissed me again and then closed the door on me, saying, Go home to these beautiful children. 2 years after my victory party, several changes occurred in my life. All 3 children are well-adjusted, happy, and thriving in school, social life, and activities. Allison has done nothing wrong. She has taken full advantage of her visitation rights and has not abused them. Amber has a much better relationship with her now than when we were a family. In fact, last summer, Amber even went with her and 2 other kids to Allison's parents' lake house for 10 days. When she returned, she had no negative feedback. My business is thriving, and I'm making more money than ever. However, my ownership of the operating companies was inadvertently exposed when the report we filed with the government was sent to several employees to whom we had not intended to provide it. Even so, it worked out, and no one treats me differently than before. Roger Mayberry left town shortly after the victory party, and according to the only employee who still has contact with him, he now works in entry-level sales for a West Coast electronics firm that does not deal in sensitive technology. The kids are more than accepting of Jezebel. All 3 see her more as a friend than a mother and really enjoy her company. Last month, she moved in with us, along with her children. Although she doesn't want to get married, she only wants to fulfill friendship and mothering duties for the children while running a small company selling specialty clothing online from an extension I built on the house for that purpose. At the same time that the extension was being built, I also installed top-quality soundproofing in the master bedroom. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that my husband appeared at the right place at the right time. If it wasn't for the circumstances, the incident might not have happened. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.